Hey everyone, this is Josh from the Solopreneur Grind podcast for episode 110. I'm really excited to be joined by Kison Patel. He is the CEO and founder at mascience.com. Kison, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Awesome, Kison. I'd love to hear an intro from the mouth of himself because it's really interesting. It's a topic that we've kind of danced around a little bit with previous guests, but haven't gone deep down the rabbit hole of M&A. But before I do too much introducing for you, could you introduce yourself? Tell everybody a little bit more about what you're focused on.
Yeah, sure. Kison Patel. I run a company called M&A Science. It's started as a pretty typical founder story. I spent about 10 years as an M&A advisor. Took a lot of inspiration from the software industry, particularly how software engineers were utilizing project management tools to develop software. That thought, why not for M&A, which led to starting Deal Room in 2012. We originally focused on the diligence management of M&A transactions. When a company goes to buy another company, they do a series of steps to really understand the business, make sure what's represented is true and accurate, identify the risks, start planning for what they're going to do after they buy the equipment company. And over time, we continued to add functionality to manage the post-close activities and the pipeline when you actually find these opportunities. And it evolved into a full lifecycle management solution for M&A. In that journey, I think one of the things we identified was the industry itself was very siloed and lacking standardization and best practices. Married the idea of using a platform or podcast specifically as a means to enable practitioners to share some of the lessons learned, which we started documenting and published a book in 2020 called Agile M&A, based on case studies with Google and Atlassian and how they utilize agile techniques in their M&A approach. That podcast really evolved into a full digital media business. We own and operate an online school for teaching M&A. So now we have a combination of education and technology business lines that really complement each other well when we work with larger corporations to optimize their M&A approach.
Very cool. So everything under the umbrella of M&A you can probably help with or provide tools for. How did you get into it way back when?
It's unique. Most people go to a nice Ivy League school or something of that sort, and they fall in the investment banking track. I didn't do that. I started my story failing out of undergrad. I was just a kid that always had a short attention span and struggled in school. Made my way through high school, but when it came to college and courses became lecture based, I really struggled into pass them and ended up literally failing out of undergrad, which was a tough time. You know, I had to really start from the bottom. Ended up working for family, which is a good hard lesson there of its own. Worked with a family that owned a number of franchised restaurants and started from the bottom, learned how to build a strong work ethic in that experience. But I wanted to get into real estate. I thought real estate was the career path I could take where you didn't necessarily have to have a college degree. And I went, got licensed, and went through the journey of still struggling, you know, working, staying home with my parents, working part-time at Subway, trying to build a real estate career, and still struggled. I couldn't sell a house for the life of me. People didn't want to buy a house from a 21-year-old kid. Uh, but I was really interested in businesses, and I found my way to working with a little boutique consulting practice. The two guys were doing as a startup, and we joined with them and got immersed in the whole process of working with private investors to buy and sell businesses. I did it for a year. I did well there, really enjoyed reviewing financials, building a business case on why the investment makes sense, where the opportunities are. I took that experience a year later and started my own practice. I just wanted to have a clear strategy and focus on a little bit more of a narrow focus in terms of the assets I was selling.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with just, I think I remember selling gas stations at the beginning for about a year and a half, and then ended up selling hotels most of the career. Then also in the last about 3 years, I worked on small financial institutions. I think of community banks, helping them raise capital, buy side, sell side. And then the recession happened, and that's what prompted me to start looking at other things. I think at that period of time, Josh, I felt like I hit this glass ceiling. You start working little deals, you build your way up, you work on 10 million, $20 million deals, even those larger $50 million deals. But I felt like anything you touched around 100 million, we'd always lose out to some bigger branded bank. And I was just frustrated. I felt like I hit this glass ceiling and wanted to find a different means. And then through technology, I found an opportunity to take some things we've learned, create solutions, and be able to scale it out to a variety of different companies.
Hmm.
Uh,
It's a very, like, I've had many guests on who flunk out of college and or high school. It almost seems to be like not a common theme, but a common enough theme amongst entrepreneurs where, as you mentioned, maybe it's an attention span thing or just the way they learn isn't kind of meshed in with school. But it's a theme that I've definitely noticed. But I think yours is a little bit even more unique in the sense that you kind of tried a few things and in different areas and maybe they did or didn't work. How did you go from struggling as a real estate agent to even landing the job with those two consultants to begin with, right? Because even that's a bit of a stretch considering you had no experience in what they were consulting on, right?
Yeah, so I worked at this Baird Winter was a residential company I worked with. There's about a large office with about 90 brokers, and there's one guy in there that was selling commercial real estate. And I latched on to him. I just kept talking to him, picked his brain a little bit, tried to understand what he was doing. I wasn't super interested in selling medical buildings or office buildings or anything like that, but I liked that he was doing something closer to what I wanted to do. And I found encouragement through him to really pursue getting into selling businesses. He pointed me to a few resources to start learning about it online. And I remember just starting to learn, find these platforms where people are listing companies for sale, calling folks, getting familiar with what that space looks like.
Hmm.
And I remember when I left the company, I thought, I'm just going to go out and do it on my own. I'm just going to go start selling businesses. And I started going in that direction. But then I think my dad introduced me because he was looking at some franchise business. And so he introduced me to the couple of guys. I think for them, they had an interesting start because they were creating a lot of leads through these online listings that they're posting. But vast majority of these respondents in the Chicago area were of Indian descent. So their strategy was, let's hire this Indian kid to go, deal with all these leads we're generating, and we probably can't understand half of them anyways. So that's where they sort of put me in that box. But I had to run the full sales cycle.
Huh.
If I'm working with prospective buyers, I had to go help them find assets to buy and do some of the search for them. And then if I found something they weren't interested, I would then turn around and say, "Hey, let me try to help you sell your business," and try to run a process to sell that asset. But it was a unique experience because when you go investment banking, you always start from the bottom. You focus on the financial modeling and you're working on larger deals typically. And then over years, you build your way up. Here, I was 21, 22 years old, and I had to do everything. There were small deals. I think the first deal I did was like 130,000 or something, super tiny little mom and pop shop. So I learned to do that full cycle where you run it end to end. But then as you do larger deals, they're fundamentally the same.
Right.
You do $100,000 deal and a $50 million deal, they're fundamentally the same. You may have more people involved looking over things, but the steps are very, very similar.
Right.
Um,
So would you
so
say that's the better way to learn then? Is smaller deals, but maybe deal size almost doesn't even matter as much, but just the opportunity you had to kind of see it from A to Z?
I would say yes, but the reason is more of the people experience. When
Hmm.
you can manage the egos, facilitate this process between the consultants, lawyers, and various parties involved, when you learn how to do that, that's what drives the deal forward. I mean, you can
Right.
always pull in experts on the legal side, people in number crunch and things like that, but to be the facilitate the conversations, negotiations, those things to get experience doing that early, I think was a big leg up because
Right.
uh, and part of me looking back wish I had a little more experience working with some of the larger investment banks to kind of broaden that view instead of jumping so early to go start my own practice. But things pan out for a reason. We
Absolutely. And then that was the other thing that really stood out from your initial intro was you worked with them for 1 year only, which seems like a short period of time when you're getting into like a new line of business, we'll call it, M&A in general. You started working with some guys for 1 year, then decided to go out on your own. What was that thought process like? Like, what was going on in your head? What ultimately led you to make that decision to go out on your own?
I think learning. I didn't feel like I was learning anything new. This is, I learned what I could from this role.
Hmm.
I want to go out and just do my own thing. I wanted to, I don't know, for some reason, I've always wanted to run a business. It's just always been wired that way, that I wanted to build something. And hey, I'm contributing to help them build, but I didn't feel part of it. I always felt like the employee there. So why not go set out and do something, build something?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a big driver. Was I just really felt I learned enough that I can go out and go do it myself. Well, so why not just go for it?
Yeah. No, it's a great attitude. What would you say, Kisan, to someone right now who's out there, maybe they're in their early 20s or maybe late 20s or late teens, and they're not sure what the heck to do? What pieces of advice would you give to them?
Like I tell my own kids, because I didn't feel like I was set off to this world with a purpose. So I say, I'm going to give you one, and then you can evolve it when you grow up, as you grow. And I tell them, find what you love to do and be the best in the world at it. So trying different things to get a sense of what are you really interested. We always get shown all these career paths in our school program, but don't look at it that way. Look at it more as the world is full of problems. Everything's there. Businesses and products are there to solve a problem. The coffee shop's there. It solves a problem. People need coffee. They need the caffeine. They need something to drink. They need a place to meet up. Like start looking at what problems are you interested in solving. I think that can help you identify what you're passionate about. And the reason that's important because you want to play long.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I learned the hard way is when you jump from segment to segment, you don't develop that expertise. You don't develop that real level of success. It just takes a while to be highly successful in a specific area. So if you can identify an area you're highly passionate about that you can play long and say, hey, I can work towards this for 10, 20 years, then, and I've just seen it time after time with entrepreneurs. When they do this 10-year run, and they sell their business or whatnot, but the exponential growth happens like year 10 through 20.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, can you keep that drive to really stay in a segment to go deep, and you'll find a very high level of success if you do that, generally speaking. Um, I think there's that piece. I think there's the other thing I notice a lot of entrepreneurs tend to want to build things or take products out. And I'm guilty of that. I'm a builder in terms of a CEO persona. But I think that right now there's a lot of great products and solutions out in the market. And the bigger problem to solve is distribution.
Hmm.
So if you can even look at the industries you're interested in or products, services you're highly interested in, see if there's something that you really believe in and really focus on learning the distribution component. If you can work with that product and help, everybody's got that problem. Everybody's looking to increase their ability to get their product and solution to the right customers that would benefit the most from it. So if you can find that solution you really believe in and help with that distribution and develop that skill set, I think that's the powerful thing. I would be able to do that, have that skill set to understand the distribution model, how to take products out, how to sell them, produce the revenue. Then once you have that ability, you can create products or whatnot, or continue doing that with other products.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this with the content. It's almost like that Content Inc. model. There's a book published with that title, but it really gets you. The model is to focus on building the community. Can you become a subject matter expert in area, create the content, create the community, and then find what the community wants? I feel like our business evolved that way. When I mentioned we have several business lines, we have a community of M&A practitioners that are striving to be the best. What do they need? Well, they need some educational resources. They need these templates. They need the proper frameworks. They need the tools. And we just ask them. And now
Mm-hmm.
we're launching a series of roundtable events because They want to connect with each other. They just don't want to sit in on webinars and take it as a passive approach. They actually want to grow their network. So, well, let's create a platform for them to do that. So I think that problem solving is the other thing that comes with it when you identify the area you want to go deep in. Uh, that's the long game is when you look at everybody gets focused on the revenues and how much money they want to make, but that's the outcome. And
Right.
ultimately, you need to create the ability to generate value. So you have this specific cohort of customers you're targeting. Can you create your capabilities that allow you to generate value for them? And that's where having that focus, it'll increase over time.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and then that's where you really find success because now you've created this compelling ability to generate value for that target set of customers, and that's where the revenue and the income becomes the outcome of it.
Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. I want to jump back to when so you started the new business on your own. What were the first few months like? Like, what was the first day like, right? Because for some people, it's kind of interesting, especially because they may not have thought about this for years or decades. But I always love to ask about, hey, what were those first few weeks like or months like? And how did you get that first business off the ground?
I think the first you're excited the first when you first open doors, you're excited. I remember I leased an office downtown Chicago, and the broker didn't know what to do with me because here's this kid that was about 22 years old that's like, hey, I want to lease this tiny little 900 square foot office. um, I don't want to sign a lease, can I just do month to month?
Mm-hmm.
And the guy had no idea what to do. Next thing you know, I'm talking to the owner of the company Mark Realty. This guy owns 30, 40 of these buildings downtown. And it was so funny. And he's just like, look, I need a lease. Like, I can't just have you in there month to month. I'll tell you what, sign a 1 year lease. You don't have to personally guarantee it. But give me a lease. So I signed up and had this tiny little office. I think I was paying like $1,300 a month of rent for. Got some cheap furniture. The stuff you have to comes in like the IKEA style flat box you got to build together.
Yeah.
And just propped up about 7 desks in there. And even though it was just me at the time working, and I found a person to bring in. I found a person that just was on an H-1 visa. He wasn't happy where he was currently working, and just like hire me as your assistant. Like, let me get out of this place. And I knew the guy was sharp. The guy's got an MBA degree from one of the schools in France, and he just ended up really doing well. He ended up just being such a great asset that he essentially became a partner in the practice that we were building. And then we grew that firm. The thing though, you had this excitement, but there was a period where it really died down and became more of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
That I started this business with maybe like $10,000 of working capital, and then not realizing how long it would really take to close a deal and produce revenue in the business. I remember having to go to my dad to borrow money. I think I had to borrow something like 20,000, and he wasn't happy about that. He gave me a
Mm-hmm.
hard time. I think he wrote like a whole interest note. I had to pay back with interest, like 9% or something, a rate to it. So he's giving me a hard time, and I remember just like, and he's like, I'm not going to give you more money. And I remember being so concerned. It's one of those things where you're like, man, am I already going to hit like 3 months in? Are we already going to fail? And we got lucky that we got a deal for a company that was going bankrupt, and it was a 363 asset sale that the bank was doing, and they let us represent these assets for sale. So we ended up selling this chain of gas stations in Indiana, and that's where the firm just started. We started picking up there. And that first year, we did about 8 or 9 different deals. I think the second, I just lost interest in that was the same thing. You jump around. I was like, I'm tired of selling these businesses. I feel like the owners are a lot like their business. They don't, they're like nonstop. And then that's where I wanted to shift my focus. I remember doing a little bit of work with the fast food chains and some healthcare deals, but then I really liked the hospitality industry, and just started with the small private businesses, and then built that practice up where I was doing corporate work for brands like Kimpton, Extended Stay America.
Hmm. That's very cool. And then talk about the I don't know if like, do we call it a pivot when you started focusing more on the tech? Obviously, you're still in the same world, right? The M&A world. But what was that transition like, or shift of focus? Or what would you call it?
It was like really abandoning this business because I did wind it down. The recession happened. And I think I was going into like 2007 with anticipation it was going to be a record year for us, and it turned out to be the worst year for us. It took a loss, and it just I knew it's one of those things I didn't want to sit there and pray that it gets better. So I basically wound down the practice and was doing it solo, where I was on my own representing a handful of the clients on some of the deals that they're working, which was mostly buying distressed things, buying distressed hotels and stuff like that. And then but I was always interested in tech. I've always been interested in tech, even building the practice. I'd always pay attention to our website, constantly update our website. I'd build our own tools in house. So I was interested in it, and I didn't jump into this thing. I started one of these deals I was trying to do. I was trying to buy a company right before this recession kicked off, and I was trying to buy it and flip it. Right? I was going to buy a privately held little healthcare clinic business and flip it to a publicly traded company, which would have been a nice little deal. But things don't always happen the way you want them to. But when I was doing diligence and I was going through this public company's S1 registration, what caught my attention was one of the acquisitions they did where they purchased a portfolio of 100.coms for about $6 million.
Hmm.
And I thought this is really, really interesting. And what I realized was they basically created this lead generation network for all their clinics based on this portfolio of domains that they had and the traffic that they could drive towards it. So this is interesting. And I started modeling off of it. I started buying financial.coms. I saw the cost per click was substantially higher than most other industries. Back then, it used to be 25 cents, 50 cents for a click. And then these finance.coms were getting about $2, $3 a click. I started buying, I think at one point I had about 500 of them.
Hmm.
And then it was a really basic thing. I said, it was just to test it out. I remember when I first started buying them was I put a blog post up and then I wrote a little script where when the user refreshes the page, it would put a new blog post up. It would just rotate through 10 different articles. And for whatever reason, that just Google thought I was constantly updating content, and it just
Hmm.
ranked this keyword domain really high. And some of them would get high; they get like 90,000 visits a month, and then you have AdSense on there, and you're generating revenue. So then it becomes, whoa, let's scale this out. And I remember building some pretty sophisticated stuff where I think after some iterations, we ended up with like a whole portal system with 200 websites that were lit up, and
Whew.
it would have this huge bank of about 5,000 articles in one of these enterprise document management systems, and it would pull in articles based on the keyword to display, and it was all automated. It was pretty cool stuff that we built, and that's one day Google changes the algorithm and just all off the grid, all gone, and game over. But in that experience, when I started doing the custom work and working with some of these engineers in Singapore and Vietnam, I got exposed to these project management tools. I started, and I'm trying to remember, Jira was one of them, and then there was another one that I got some really. It was just interesting. I thought this is actually pretty cool because I struggled with managing their task on Excel. You have one Excel, next thing you have another Excel sheet. You have like 7 Excel sheets going on.
Hmm.
And when you have this project management tool, it organized it much better. And that's where it started getting the ideas, because going back and saying, hey, I need to focus on the industry I actually know. So I want to do something in M&A. And I remember, I think I had some idea in between, again, another little thing I was modeling out, didn't work out. But I said, why don't I build a tool to run an M&A process? Then you get that same entrepreneur dilemma, like feature creep. So you have an
Hmm.
outline of like, okay, here's like this core thing that would solve the problem. But then you're like, well, we should add this feature and this feature and this feature. And next thing you know, you have this 20-page outline. Then you're like, okay, where do I start? And I thought at the time, start from the very beginning when somebody needs to go find a deal. So we started building a marketplace to help buyers and sellers connect to find the deal, thinking we'd over time build the rest of the components out, that we should start with that first step. And we spent about a year build. Well, we didn't spend a year building it. We built prototyped it pretty quick. I think within 6 months we had it out the door. We ran it. So about 13 months in, we realized we built this sophisticated dumpster for deals. We had
Mm-hmm.
about 200 deals listed, 1,300 users. And I looked at this. I'm like, all these deals are trash. Like they're not a single deal I would invest in. They're all
Yeah.
stuff that is belong in the dumpster. So that's when we went back to the drawing board, and that's where like the other hard lesson, and I always when I talk to other entrepreneurs starting out, validate the problem you're solving. And from the beginning. Like you have assumptions, whether you realize it or not. You're gonna go convince your friends and family that you're solving a great, worthy problem, but you need to take more of a scientific approach. And you think you can Google like customer development interviews, or there's different ways of approaching it. But if you can build some questions that are designed to be unbiased. You can identify cohorts of people, you can reach out to them. Even the response of them caring to take time to talk to you about this problem you're trying to solve is an indicator if it's even of interest to them. And then talk to them, saying, "Hey, what's your biggest problem? Say you're podcasting, I'm building a solution for improving podcasts. Josh, what's the biggest challenge you have as a podcaster?" And just sit back and listen
Mm-hmm.
and just try to be as a because when you do that and you do a pattern of them, because I always talk to these entrepreneurs and I tell them go do about 40 of these interviews and see, let's go through the findings, see what you learn. You might find a bigger problem to solve. So we took that approach. I remember doing that out of 1871 in Chicago, a little incubator center with a couple interns. And that's what we really realized was the management part was really where it was at. Like forget about the front end. People that have problems finding their deals, especially in the space that we're targeting, which was this middle market, like the $100 million up transactions. They don't have a problem. They can find the deals. It's just the management part. And I remember one of the guys at William Blair was very specific that it's this Excel tracker that I really hate
Mm-hmm.
because every time I get it in, our firm's so meticulous on responding to every little line item. And I could end up with 300 requests for information. Then when I provide this, they have follow-up questions. Then I got to go, next thing you know, we're trying to have this conversation in an Excel tracker. And then I got to link all these documents to this virtual data room. And those products are clunky and overpriced. And I was just like, wow, this is highly, highly inefficient. This is where we need a laser focus on. And that's where even like those early inspirations of project management, that's where it belongs, is right here. And that's where we started, keep doing those series of interviews and started modeling a solution. And wireframes are commonly used. I personally would prefer to just hire a student to do mock-ups because a lot of people don't, they see wireframes and they don't get it. It's a little more of a technical approach for drawing. Uh, so I hired some students to do mock-ups, and then you start showing it to folks again, get feedback. Well, what do you think about this? What do you think? It's easy to make changes on a mock-up. You don't want to build a product then try to make changes. It's
Mm-hmm.
very expensive to make changes after you code it. And then that's where really we kept that iterative approach and allowed us to build a solution that we have even today that we still use fundamentally. And today that's our approach. Our approach is always, when I look at the product, there's not even 5% of it are my ideas. It's
Mm-hmm.
all just what you're learning for the market and the feedback that you're getting and building off of it. So that's where we've got our direction after having that tough start. And there was more challenges. The go to market is a whole big challenge of itself. We thought, oh, let's sell like the competitors are selling, the big incumbents. Bad idea. They got sales reps, they pay extremely well. They got bottomless expense cards, so they're whining and dining. We realized that these people, we weren't selling against a better technology. We're selling against who's spending the most money in the client. And I would sit in on our early sales reps or even myself trying to sell with them. And we would go through, demo the product, and they'd be like, yeah, this looks really cool. So what do you guys do? Like your competitors, they buy us ball game tickets and take us out for these fancy dinners. Like, what do you guys do for your clients? And then we're just like, we didn't know what to say. Like, we're not
Right.
trying to bribe you. And I knew that was a wrong thing, right? I don't want to get in a game where I got to pay for your business. That's not what we set out to do. That's not the right thing. So we kind of hit a challenge there. But what it was interesting enough, we found a different market. We ended up shifting our focus to corporates because we realized the banks, they weren't incentivized to drive efficiency to their bottom line. The guys that get the deals, they get paid a percentage off the top. They don't
Right.
care what happens after that. They don't care about the net bottom. The people that make the decisions and the technology, the junior bankers, they want to get out of there in a year. They don't really care. They're not there. They hate their job. They're frustrated. They don't like the culture is extremely toxic. It's very much top down management. So we weren't getting anywhere there. It wasn't fun to sell in that space. When we started working with corporates, they're very value driven. If you can demonstrate and create value for them, they appreciated it. They wanted to work with you. And that's where we identified our early adopters were actually there. And then our go to market shifted because when we talked to them and spend the time to validate, how do you want to buy? And then we shifted to create quality content for them. And that's where we got involved in podcasting and said, well, if we can create quality content, and there's obviously a lot of room to do that. There's not a lot of standardization. We started building, interviewing folks and extracting some lessons learned and built that into business lines of its own.
Very cool. Yeah, no, there's so much to take away from that. That's a really interesting journey too, and I just find it kind of, I guess you can say funny because you had this big problem in mind that you thought you were going to start on, and then you ended up moving away to what many would describe as much harder, right? Like building a marketplace of buyers and sellers, but then eventually came back to your kind of original concept that ended up working. So it is funny how things work out, right? Even if it takes a little bit longer. So can we talk about like how did that almost, maybe we'll call it like a light bulb moment, I don't know if it was, but like thinking about the content side of things, because obviously that's so important these days. Number one, it can be huge for distribution, which as you said is a big, it's a big problem for a lot of people. But as you said earlier, it's all like you'll go to any business owner and it's something they all want more of, right? More sales, more revenue, more distribution. So how did you guys come to that realization? And then what were the first few steps you took, or what are some good content creation strategies or distribution even related strategies?
Yeah, at the time I knew we needed to do something for marketing. And I went to a friend I met through a networking event, and I asked him, I said, I need some advice on this because we're early stage startup and this and that. And I was telling him, we do these phone calls where we interview folks, we learn a lot from them, the feedback sort of loop that we create. And he's like, man, you got to do a podcast. And I was like, what the hell is a podcast?
When was this? Like around what time? Just for
2017.
Oh wow! So
And
podcasting was pretty decent at that point, I guess, right? It was not obviously as big as it has been the last couple of years, but grown a little bit.
yeah, it's I had no idea. So this is a friend of mine, Andy, that's like, hey, and he pushed me. He's like, you got to do it. There's actually this conference coming in town, as podcast movement. Happened to have been in Chicago that year. And I went there and got to go talk to podcasters. I got to meet all these vendors, learn about the ecosystem, try a bunch of microphones out. It was cool. That is all right. I'll give it a shot. Let me try this. I said, at the very least, we'll take these podcasts and we'll write blog posts from it, get our marketing
Hmm.
going that way. And then that thing, the first year I didn't even look at the numbers. I don't think anybody was listening to it. We just wrote those blog posts, posted it. I think like the second year I got an email from somebody that's like, hey, I like your podcast. I was like, oh, cool. This is my first fan here. And then I started looking at the numbers and realized like, oh, we're actually, people are listening to this stuff. And then I think around the third year is when I brought in actual marketing resource. I think we're at that point where we went to I hired some sales reps, we went to market and didn't do very good. We're selling to the banks. We didn't do very good. And then I came back and I said, okay, let's focus on the marketing. And this is right around the time we started shifting to corporate focus. And she started coming in with the basics. Here's social media. Let's make the blog better, create more content. And then we really blended that podcast together with this marketing function to make it the center of it. And the strength we created from doing that was the way we repurpose content. So we would transcribe all these podcasts and create the blog posts. We could take maybe a couple around the same topic and put an ebook together, and just kept going with it. Just kept creating content. In the fourth year, we had COVID happen. We went to lockdown in the fourth year. that's where I was like, okay, we're about 20 people head count at the time. And we started picking up traction at the time. We started getting some good logos with the corporate accounts. We're still early. I said, okay, nobody's going to be buying anything. Let's double, triple down on marketing. So we started live streaming, and we didn't even have video up until that point. When we started live streaming, we added the video component to it. And then the industry itself, everybody's canceling all their conferences left and right. I enjoyed going to those conferences. I was disappointed. I thought, well, this isn't what they should do. They're supposed to pivot and figure out their digital distribution model. Like, why don't we make a point and show them how it's done? So we, out of nowhere, just announced our own conference in June 9th and 10th of 2020. And it turned out to be a huge hit. We had about 50 speakers from top firms, Microsoft, Google, Cisco, IBM, SAP. I have 1,500 people sign up for it. And it just got her name out there big time. And then I mean, after that, everybody figured out they have to do something. So everybody started boom, boom, doing all online events.
Right. This was like a virtual conference?
It was all virtual. It was all virtual. So then we kept that series. But then, what was interesting was we always kept getting feedback. Always tell us, what do you want? We asked all these people for feedback. Tell us, well, how can we make this event better? What changes do you want to see in the industry? And the one common thing we heard from this group of people was they wanted to know the practical how-tos of M&A. And that's what we realized. Like, there's this big void with the training programs out there. Most of them are ran by consulting firms that use it to sell consulting services. Nobody's really creating something of high quality that is updated with today's approaches. And that's where we started talking to some of the practitioners that we've interviewed for the podcast and said, hey, would you want to come and just teach like anything, whatever, just we just want to see if this works.
Mm-hmm.
So we started building out courses, and it's different than a podcast. You got to spend a lot more resources in editing because you're chopping it up into a microservices learning format. You put a little quiz, completion badge. And we just did. I think we first started doing that, just getting the idea, identifying who'd want to teach. But then we started pre-selling it before we even built the thing. We just ran out saying, hey, look, this is like a coming soon thing. Do you want to early sign up? Super cheap, $240 a year. I think we had about 10 people sign up. I said, all right, good enough validation. Let's do it. Let's let's build this thing. And I think that was last year was the first year we ran it. We did about 100,000 revenue first year. We increased the price 50%, and we're still seeing an increase in signups this year. So it's I think that goes back to that feedback. You got to keep the feedback loop there, but the content too. It's again a form of repurposing content. We just ended up commercializing it. We put a lot. I mean, we need to because it costs a lot more to create that kind of course format. But now we're actually organizing them and creating certifications, so it continues to evolve. But now, for the content strategy, it ties with that focus, because when you look at today, and I think there's a lot of the influencers in our software world will tell you that you need to build in a media business in any tech company you're taking to market. I think that's true, because that's something that we did early that played out for the long run. Like all this SEO and stuff like that, that's a long-term game, but it builds your brand. It gets you very conscious about how are people thinking of your company, and builds trust. That's the biggest thing. I think the thing that helped us was that when we did the podcast, it wasn't just to do a podcast. There was a mission behind it.
Right.
We had this mission of enabling practitioners to share lessons learned. That's what the whole mission was, and it made it easier to get people to come speak. It was obviously hard in the beginning. I tried to get family members or whoever I could to go speak on there, but when you had that mission to constantly reference, it just got easier and easier. And then going into the 5th year, it definitely pays up, but it takes a while. I don't know, in this market, I think it's a lot harder to get something like that going. When we started, there was about 5 of them. I remember the numbers were like 1,000 downloads the first year, 7,000 the second year, 28,000 the third, 120,000 the 4th year, and then 240,000 the 5th year. So it definitely takes time to build that up.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be good at it and you got to be consistent because there's a lot of other people doing it now, right? Podcasting specifically, and then blogging, social media. So you got to put enough time and effort because it's, we're in the what's it called, the scrolling economy, right? So if you can't
Yeah.
if you can't grab and keep people's attention, it's tough. Kisan, this has been great. Just a couple last questions here. Do you have one or two tips for maybe like a smaller company or a newer company on a budget in terms of like content creation? I love what you were talking about with repurposing and making the most of, you know, maybe one big piece of content and repurposing it as many ways as possible. Do you have any like one or two tips on how maybe a company on a budget could do something like that a little more effectively or make the most of what they can?
That's like my buddy Andy. I took him out for dinner about last year and said, "Hey man, I really just want to thank you. You're the one that got me into podcasting. It's been such a big win for us." And he kind of looked straight at me. He's like, at the time, that's like the only thing I thought you could afford to do. So, like, well, thanks,
Yeah.
But I do like the platform of the podcast, even though it's not like the immediate win game. It helps you in a lot of different ways because one, you could reach people that you may not otherwise be able to reach if you just went out to them and asking for their time.
Mm-hmm.
Because it changes the dynamics. You're not like, hey, give me your time so I can pitch you or get advice from you. It's, hey, I want to feature you. I want to get your message out there to this audience. So it changes the dynamic and give you access. I mean, for even to this year, we've got a couple of public company CEOs on our podcast. Those are people that it would be difficult for me to get a meeting with them just for advice or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one thing. It does actually help your business because if you're doing like an account-based sales approach or things of that sort, you can get in front of those people that would otherwise be hard to get in front of. It gives you a lot of that content to work with. You can start building that out if you can start putting up more of the subject matter expert type of content on your website, things like that. You can do those. The clickbait, put a downloadable PDF was easy to build off of that, because you could do a little theme and say, okay, let me find three people around this one topic, and that's related to our industry. And then it's easier too when you can start thinking of your content as funnel. Here's my top funnel,
Right.
broad changes in the industry. Here's more specific problem our folks are hitting, and then here's how we solve them. The other thing, it just improves your communication skills quite a bit.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's another valuable thing is when you have these conversations. You're doing a good job interviewing, Josh.
Thank
You're
you.
asking good follow-up questions. You're layering it. You're
Well, I
pulling out the
mean,
stories.
along your point, like I've done it now 109 times, right? So like I would think if I were to, if you or anybody were to go back and listen to episodes, 1 through 30, they would probably be okay, I think, and then, slowly get better. But I couldn't agree more, right? Like the amount of prep and what has to go into having a quote unquote like smoother conversation has just gone way down because I've done it literally 109 times, right? Like you get that many reps with anything and it's going to go a little bit better, right?
Big time. Do you monitor your recordings?
What do you mean by monitor?
So if I'm not in my studio, I'm on the road right now, but if you use an audio interface, you can listen to the recording as it's getting recorded, which would include your own voice.
Huh.
When you
No.
do that, it takes a little bit to get used to because you're hearing yourself talk as you talk. That'll make you highly conscious about filler words, like how
Interesting.
a lot
But
of
would that
your
be
aspects of your
distracting?
vocal.
My concern there is if I can hear my own voice, is that
You get
distracting at all?
You'll get used to it. In
Oh
fact, you'll
yeah.
probably start liking and appreciating your voice more. But
Interesting.
yeah, there's some USB mics that do it. I don't think it's as great as if you got like a Focusrite audio interface, and then you can do like an XLR mic. Then you can plug your headphones right there and just listen.
Hmm.
That's big time. I thought about even having our sales reps with that kind of setup so they can
Hmm.
improve the way they speak. When you use more filler words, you don't sound as confident. So if you can eliminate that, listen to yourself. I ramble a little much. I'm working on that and speak a little bit more concise responses. But obviously, you can listen to yourself back is another approach to make those kind of improvements. But that's another thing with that podcast setup. If you can actually monitor yourself,
Interesting.
big improvement in communication.
I'll definitely look into that. That's I've never heard anybody suggest that, or even oops, I just almost, speaking of mics, almost yanked mine out. Interesting. No, I'm gonna have to look into it. Awesome, Kisan. This has been great. I mean, I'm getting live, practical tips by the minute here. So this is really great. Was great having you on. Was great listening to your story and getting a lot of these tips. Just wondering if you have one or two last piece of advice. Maybe somebody's out there working a 9 to 5, a job they don't like, or beginning of, maybe they started their own company. They're going through the tough times. Do you have any just like one or two general pieces of advice or messages you would tell them?
Yes, this is probably the big thing I'm working on with my kids at home. But I talked to them a lot about empathy, and I just feel like it plays in so many different contexts because a lot of times, even as an entrepreneur, we get fixated on our agenda. When we have our meetings, we get very much wrapped up around what we want to say to the other person, what we want to get out of the meeting. But if you can put all that to the side, if you can enter conversations, assume what you know is wrong or you don't know anything, it'll put you in this intense listening mode where you can really spend the time to understand the other person, how they think, how they feel, why they feel that way, what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, what are the challenges they're coming across. And if you can align yourself around helping the other person achieve those things, you're going to end up progressing a lot further. In
Hmm.
fact, the fact that you take the time to really listen, understand, they become more open to reciprocate and listen to you. I think that's just, it goes so far. It goes so far in a lot of situations, professionally, personally, conflict resolution. We can argue our points to death, Josh, if we don't get along about what mic to use for this interview. But if I can spend the time to understand why do you think the way you do? Why, what, like, truly understand it, and even tell you that, explain it back to you to let you know I really understand, that changes things. It opens things up to be more receptive to understand my views so we can actually come to some resolution or terms. I think that's the big thing we tend to lose sight of as an entrepreneur in the beginning because we want to push to get things done. But if we really need to spend the time to listen and empathize with these customers, and we're trying to help solve their problems, at the end of the day, that's where we create value, is solving problems for our customers.
Absolutely. It's a great point, and it's a great note to end on. Kisan, great having you on the show. If people want to learn more about you or any of your companies or solutions, or if they want to get in touch, where do you recommend that they go?
If they're interested in learning about M&A, there's a lot more careers than banking and M&A. We have tons of content around it. And last year, we started a diversity scholarship to encourage women and people of diverse backgrounds to get involved, and completely free. That's all on mascience.com. And myself, I'm usually on LinkedIn, just Kison, Kison Patel.
Awesome. We'll link to those in the description. Kisan, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Josh.